This program is brought to you in partnership with the Central Bank of Nigeria.
Hello and you're welcome to Business Highlights on Trust TV. And on the show, we take a look at major economic and business development of the week. Now, what we do is we break them down, we analyze them, and we see how it affects the average Nigerian out there. Now, today on the show, we're going to be discussing the most recent Monetary Policy Committee meeting, which took place on the 23rd and 24th of January. Now, this was the first meeting, of course, for 2023, and many people were out there waiting to actually see the outcome of the Monetary Policy Committee. So we're going to be taking a look at that. Now, during the MPC meeting, the CBN Governor Godwin Emefiele also had a message for Nigerians out there who are still hoping and praying for an extension of the January 31st deadline. We'll be getting into that right after the break.
This is Trust TV, documenting the Nigerian story.
You're welcome back to the show. Now, the MPC made the decision to hike the interest rate by 100 basis points, taking it from 16.5 to 17.5%. Now, this is very different from what a lot of experts out there were actually hoping for or, predicting. But yes, that's what happened at the end of the day. And like I said earlier on, no extension for the 31st January deadline to, for the old Naira notes to now become extinct or, stop being a legal tender. So we'll take a look at this report.
The first MPC meeting for 2023 had been highly anticipated, as many have been curious to see what move the CBN's MPC will make. Governor of the Apex Bank insists deadline for the withdrawal of old 1,500 and 200 Naira notes from circulation remains, despite calls from different quarters requesting for an extension.
I must say here that unfortunately, I don't have good news for those who feel that we should shift the deadline. My apologies. The reason is because, just like the president had said on more than 2 occasions, and even to people privately, that for us, 90 days, in fact, we feel is 100 days is enough for anybody who has money or the old currency to deposit the money in the banks. And we took every measure to ensure that all the banks were open or remain still open to receive all old currencies.
The NPC meeting announced that the benchmark interest rate will be hiked by 100 basis points, taking it from 16.5% to 17.5%. CBN Governor explains that the decision is in a bid to aggressively fight inflation. The decision to hike the interest rate comes despite a slight decrease in inflationary pressures, which he says is not enough to celebrate.
The economy remained confronted with the risk of high inflation, with adverse consequences on the general standard of living. The committee therefore decided to sustain the current stance of policy at this point in time to further rein in inflation aggressively. In summary, MPC voted to 1. Raise MPR to 17.5%, 2. Retain the asymmetric corridor at plus 100 and minus 700 basis points around the corridor, and 3. Retain the CRR at 2.5%, and 4. Retain the liquidity ratio at 30%.
Several experts, as well as international financial institutions, have warned against developing nations using monetary tightenings to fight inflation, as it may further complicate life for its citizens.
All right, that was the Central Bank Governor Godwin Emefiele. Bad news for those expecting or hoping that the January 31st deadline is going to be extended, as well as him announcing the increase in the interest rate. Now, this is the highest interest in about 21 years. So far, there's been about 600 basis points in increase, and a lot of experts out there are questioning a lot of the decisions that the CBN is making as far as the interest rate hikes are concerned. Now, joining me in the studio today is economist Uche Waleke. You're welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Chairman.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for inviting me.
Now, what were you expecting as the outcome? This has been a very highly anticipated MPC meeting. So many people were curious to see what the decision of the MPC is going to make, considering that in 2022 we had about four increases, I believe, in the interest rate. Now, a lot of people felt that maybe there will be a decrease, especially for the fact that the inflation rate had seen a, I think, 0.13% decline. And now we have the MPC saying, no, sorry, it's not enough. Yeah. We have to take it higher. Yeah. So what were you expecting? Do you agree with the decision by the MPC?
Chamong, you see, what history has shown us is that every January, MPC usually does not tinker with the MPR. Okay, so I was expecting that would also play out, this month, that the MPC would hold rates, all the rates, because come to think of it, the MPR at 17.5% is quite high, and it's not just the MPR you're looking at; you're also looking at the other parameters. You're looking at the cash reserve requirements, which is as high as 32.5%. You're looking at liquidity ratio of 30%. Now, comparatively, even if you look at what is happening in the case of Ghana, for example, where inflation rate is in excess of 50%, okay? Yes, the policy rate in Ghana might be 27%, but what of the other parameters that also banks, tend to contend with? The cash reserve requirement in Ghana is not more than 15%, but here we have 32.5%. So I am saying that the policy environment is, quite tight, very tight, and it's also not helping output. Okay, it's having some consequences, adverse consequences on economic growth. You mentioned it that between May and November, the MPR was increased by 500 basis points. Now we're talking about 600 basis points. Okay, from 11.5% to now 17.5%. That's 600 basis points. And I'm saying, it's quite high. And not only it's quite high, it's coming in very quick, succession. So part of why I had expected the MPC to hold the rates, okay, has to do with the fact that even if you look at it globally, inflation rate is cooling in places like the US, where in December, for example, it came in at 6.45% from over 7% that it was in November. And of course, that also means that we should expect that going forward, the Federal Reserve may not be tightening monetary policy as it used to do, at least in terms of the size. So that should also rub off on what we are doing here. So I wasn't expecting the MPC to further raise it by even if it was going to raise it, not by as much as 100 basis points. And again, you mentioned it, inflation came in a little lower in December, 21.34 from 21.47 in November, even though it's marginal. But what nobody has said, what studies have not shown, because I don't know if any study that relates that drop, to the fact that the MPC, has been tightening rates. So I'm saying that inflation rate is not dropping because MPC is tightening rates. It could be, also connected with this the cash withdrawal limit and the currency redesign. So because that is in place already, cash withdrawal limit is in place, currency redesign is in place, meant to mop up money in circulation, because the whole essence of tightening monetary policy is to reduce money supply. Because you already have this, in my view, that would have been enough to also hold, the rate in January, at least to see how the year, pans out. So I think if I were a member of the MPC, I would have voted to hold the rates, because as I said earlier on, it is not in the interest of growth, economic growth. What has happened now is that cost of borrowing will rise. The banks will automatically reprice their loans. So cost of borrowing will rise, and access to credit will reduce. So that also rubs off negatively on output growth.
All right, so we're going to take a pause on this, take a short breather, and when we get back, we're going to continue the discussion. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
This program is brought to you in partnership with the Central Bank of Nigeria.
Trust TV, documenting the Nigerian story.
This program is brought to you in partnership with the Central Bank.
You're welcome back to Business Highlights on Trust TV. My name is Chamun Dabeng, and I'm here with two seasoned economists. I have here with me Dr. Ali Aldo as well as Professor Uche Uwaleke, and we're currently taking a look at the latest Monetary Policy Committee. The interest rate has been hiked from 16.5 to 17.5%, which is a 100 basis point increase, making it the highest in about 21 years so far. Now, we already heard from Professor Uche. He says that this move is not in the interest of economic growth. Now, we want to hear from Dr. Ali Aldo. So tell us, what do you think about this move by the CBN to hike interest rates to 17.5%? Do you agree with Professor Uche when he says it's not in the interest of economic growth?
Thank you very much. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with him in the sense that right now we are facing a lot of cash crunch because of the change of currency. And that in itself is enough to cause scarcity, and people do not have access to money. So that in itself, if we're looking at inflation, I doubt if inflation is going to go up this month. So the increase of the rate to 17.5%, I think, is too many steps at one time, because you know, we have to be careful not to you know, put in too many policies in the economy at once, because people might suffer. Right now, you can't even get more than 20,000 Naira if you want money. So that in itself has limited the amount of money in circulation, or that will be in circulation. So why then, at this time, are you now reducing, increasing the rate? So, you know, that will obviously make it difficult for people to have access to money, because if the interest rate is high, not a lot of businesses want to go and you know, borrow money, and that is a monetary policy that is used to reduce the amount of money in supply. So I believe it's not economic, it's more of political, because it's political season. And as I said before, you know, the introduction of the Naira is political, it's not economic. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you for that. Now, we've had a lot of questions surrounding CBN policy so far. You know, why are we having this interest rate hikes, and at the end of the day, we're not really seeing any effect on the inflation? Of course, only had a 0.13% decline in the recent NBS inflation report. Now, the question, when you look at a lot of countries like the US, more developed nations, they made the decision to equally increase their rate, to have a rate hike. And, you know, US had about, I think, a little over 2-point decline in their own inflation rate. Why are we not seeing the same thing translate when it comes to Nigeria?
Okay, Chamon, you see, in the US, if you see what has happened over time, the Federal Reserve has increased the Fed fund rate, that's their own policy rate, Fed fund rate from a near 0% to now a band of between 4.25 and 4.55%. And that's, of course, unprecedented level. But that's again because of the high rate of inflation, you know, in the US, partly on account of the Russian-Ukraine war. So now that inflation rate has begun to slow in the US, I just told you that the December figure, the Labor Department, you know, the December figure that was announced is 6.45% from 7.11 thereabouts in the month of November. Now it is slowing down, and we also know that this is what is also happening, you know, across the globe. It is expected that these central banks now will also begin to, you know, slow down on the rate of tightening. Before, the Federal Reserve used to do 75 basis points, but I think the last one they did was 50 basis points. So it's expected that they'll begin to slow down. In the case of Nigeria, the factors that drive inflation here are not exactly the same as the factors that are driving inflation in the US. And that's why a lot of people think that ours is more of supply side factors, you know, cost push inflation, as opposed to demand pull, where you have too much money chasing too few goods. Yes, it has been established that there's also a monetary aspect of it, which the central bank can deal with, you know, using the tools available, you know, to it. One of which is the, you know, the MPR. But largely, the factors driving inflation in Nigeria here are structural. They are supply side. One of which is the you know, the challenge we are having in output, food output. Remember, this inflation we are talking about is more on food. The pressure is more on food. Food inflation is over 23%. Okay, whereas core inflation is still you know, less than 19%. So, as long as we keep having this challenge with food output, due largely in part to insecurity, okay, we are also going to have inflation. So until we tackle insecurity, until we tackle rising cost of energy, you see how much people buy fuel these days, okay? All these costs have cost passed to the consumer. Until we tackle this cost of transportation, for example, you won't be in a position to really deal with inflation. So inflation challenge in the country is Nigeria today is something that will take not only the central bank, but also the fiscal authorities to join hands, you know, to tackle. It's not something the central bank alone, you know, can tackle by just raising interest rates, which is why I think that a strategy of raising rates to be able to tame inflation may not really work as long as these other challenges, insecurity, cost of, you know, rising cost of petroleum products and so on, as long as they are not, you know, tackled. So I think that the central bank to recognizes this, which is also why if you look at that communique, they mention some of these, you know, some of these factors that yes, they are also there, and these are factors the fiscal authorities, you know, should handle. But again, let me say this: the prism through which I see what they have done by increasing that rate, you know, further tightening, is to possibly see how they can again check what is going on in the you know, forex market. because by also mopping up money, reducing money in liquidity in the system, they also think that they can also control the the depreciation of the Naira in the forex market, particularly in the parallel markets, if they can check the volume of money out there. But just as you also said, since the cash withdrawal limit is there, currency redesign is also there, I think that is in itself is sufficient to take care of that, while they hold the rates and then see how they can also help to stimulate economic growth using monetary policy, as the central bank has done in the past.
All right, so my next question for Dr. Aliyu out there is, are we having a bit of an over-dependence on monetary policies? We've had international financial institutions warn developing nations like Nigeria to not depend so much at rate tightenings in order to quell inflation. We've also had it in the recently concluded World Economic Forum. That same warning was put out there. But here we are still trying to use monetary policies to fix a problem in the country. What happens to the fiscal policies? At what point do they come in to play a role to sort of fix the situation?
Very good question. That's why you see the Ministry of Finance is largely absent in most of these policies. When we heard that the CBN was redesigning the Naira, the Ministry of Finance also heard the same time like any other Nigerian. Now this is wrong. This is wrong because they are the team, while the central bank is managing the fiscal monetary policy, this Ministry of Finance, the Minister of Finance is supposed to handle the fiscal policies, i.e. taxes. And they have to work together because both of them form the most important committee of the economic team. Now, if they're not working together, then there will be no coherence in economic policies. And that's why there was this blame game between the CBN and the Ministry of Finance, trading words. Oh, I didn't know that the CBN was designing policies. Well, we had that. That is totally wrong. That is not good for the economy. Now, excellent question you asked. Our tax percent, our tax rate in this country is greatly underdeveloped. In most countries, taxes is normally 25% of GDP. In this country, it is 6% of GDP. That is why there's a huge gap in generating revenue. That's why we are borrowing, because our tax system is greatly underdeveloped. Now, normally, if in a country that where both systems or both sectors are working, you'll notice that they'll come together and make a coherent decision together. But now, because our tax is greatly underdeveloped, you cannot use the fiscal policy to make any meaningful economic decision, because our tax system is just 6% of GDP. Most countries is 25%, and that's how it should be. So we need to do a lot of work on that aspect. I'm not saying that we should increase our taxes. I'm saying that
open up the tax bracket.
We should open up a tax bracket, and we should involve all components in the taxing system. Because as far as every nation is concerned, everybody must pay taxes. There shouldn't be loopholes. There shouldn't be, we don't have property tax, we don't have inheritance tax. There are a lot of taxes that we are not using, which we are supposed to use. Tax the rich. And this is a means for government to generate revenue rather than borrowing. So that is why there's a divorce between the fiscal policy, Ministry of Finance, and the monetary policy, CBN. There's a lot of weight on the central bank. And that's why sometimes, like this, what is happening now? Changing, redesigning the Naira, and at the same time, bringing down, increasing the rates. Now, this is going to lead to cash crunch because people don't have access to money. And you don't use political reasons and expect economic results. It doesn't work like that.
All right. On the taxes, I'm very sure there are quite a few Nigerians out there that would complain about that. Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have enough time. So let's just hear from Professor Uche before we go. Do you have any final comments on this?
Well, my final comment is to advise. I know that the central bank is a very responsive institution, responsive, and an institution that listens to the yearnings of the people out there. When on, I think, December 5, the central bank came up with this idea of limiting cash withdrawal to 20,000 Naira. Of course, there was this hue and cry, and the central bank, in my view, listened. In response, the limit was increased from 20,000 a day to 100,000 a day for individuals. So I think that was being a case of being sensitive. And I also think the agitations, by the public, by stakeholders, that there should be an extension of deadline with respect to the, this currency deadline of January 31st. I also think that by Tuesday, the central bank will review the situation, and of course, if there is need to extend the deadline, which I am in support of, at least by a few more days, the central bank, I'm advising the central bank to do so, so that Nigerians can have a lot more time to return old notes, and then the new notes can also be available, because right now the new notes are not available as people would expect. The POS, even up today, if you go to POS, they still don't have the new notes to dispense. All
right, thank you very much. Like I said, time is definitely not our friend today. Well, we have come to the end of our show for today, and I would like to thank my guests in the studio. Thank you so much, Professor Uche, and thank you so much, Dr. Aliyu, for being a part of the show. And to our viewers out there, thank you so much for watching. Do not forget to follow us on our social media platforms. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, basically every platform out there. Just look up Trust TV News and you'll definitely find us there. And you can you can watch episodes that you have missed and also rewatch them. Well, my name is Chamun.
This program is brought to you in partnership with the Central Bank of Nigeria.